No sniper survives the desert winds at 1,000 yards, but one old man was about to prove otherwise. Lieutenant Cole Mercer's shot cracked into the sand short of the target. Another humiliating miss. The other SEAL snipers fared no better. Curses muffled by the Nevada wind. 100 yards behind them, an old groundskeeper pushing a rusted cart slowed his steps, eyes narrowing at the whipping flag above the berm. Before we push on, check in. Soldier, what city are you watching from? If you believe in quiet heroes among us, subscribe to Stories Unseen. The morning sun turned the Ironcliff Training Range into a furnace of glare and heat. Mirage waves danced across the desert floor, warping the silhouette target 1,000 yards downrange. Mercer yanked his bolt open and shut with growing frustration. Around him, 5 teammates lay prone, their XM-2010 enhanced sniper rifles gleaming under the brutal light. Petty Officer Nash muttered through clenched teeth. Crosswinds are laughing at us. 10 knots 1 second, 20 the next. Chief Instructor Maddox's boots ground into the dust as he paced. 28 years in the teams, and he still couldn't hide the disappointment twisting his voice. Gentlemen, 1,000 yards should be a chip shot. You're Navy SEAL snipers, act like it. Mercer bit down on his mouthpiece, exhaled slow, and squeezed again. The thunderous recoil echoed against canyon walls, but through spotting scopes, the result was undeniable. Miss, low and left. The silence that followed stung worse than Maddox's glare. Nash shook his head. These winds are eating us alive. The wind roared across the barren valley, scattering grit against visors, reminding every man on the line that nature didn't care about rank, rifles, or reputations. Sweat pooled under Mercer's collar despite the dry air, and with each failed shot, the swagger he'd carried into the range began to fracture, behind the firing line. The old man in coveralls stopped pushing his cart. He leaned on the handle, watching the young warriors fight a losing battle against an enemy they couldn't see. His silver hair glinted under the sun, his weathered hands resting easy. For 12 years. Elias Kane had kept to the background fixing irrigation lines, trimming weeds, hauling brass. To them, he was furniture. To himself, he was content. But as he studied the gusting flag and the dancing mirage over the target, something stirred, and when Mercer slammed his bolt forward for another shot, Kane finally spoke. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. 6 heads turned. The SEALs stare at the old groundskeeper. Why would a gardener interrupt elite snipers at work? "Excuse me." The words floated over the crack of gunfire, carried on the desert wind. 6 heads turned in unison. Behind the firing line stood Elias Kane, leaning casually on the handle of his battered cart. A rake rested across his calloused palms, dust clinging to his faded coveralls. The logo of Ironcliff Base was almost worn off his chest pocket. His ball cap tilted low over silver hair that glinted in the sun. "The winds are shifting out of the northeast," he continued softly, his tone almost apologetic yet edged with quiet certainty. 18, maybe 20 knots at this elevation. You'll want to hold 3 minutes left, 1 up, or that target will keep laughing at you. The range fell silent. For a few beats, only the hiss of sand against steel rang in their ears. Then Lieutenant Mercer barked out a laugh. "Did the gardener just give me a wind call?" His voice dripped arrogance. Petty Officer Nash snorted. "What's next? Old man gonna teach us breaching with a lawnmower?" Even Chief Maddox's stony face cracked into a thin smile. He cleared his throat, masking it as discipline. "Elias, right, I appreciate the observation, but these are trained SEAL snipers. They don't need gardening tips." Kane nodded politely, his gray eyes flicking from the snapping flag to the hazy mirage hovering over the distant target. "Of course. Chief, I used to do a little hunting back in the day. Hunting." Mercer sneered. "Let me guess. Deer season with a 30.06, maybe a coyote or two. Something like that, Elias murmured, not rising to the bait. Chief Maddox shifted, studying the old man more closely now. There was something in Kane's posture, a stillness, a balance that tugged at his instincts. 3 decades in special operations had taught Maddox to recognize men who carried ghosts, and this groundskeeper carried plenty. Tell you what, Mr. Kane, Maddox said slowly, his voice low as if weighing dynamite in his hands. Why don't you show us what you learned on those hunts? The words struck the line like a detonation. Mercer sat up, incredulous. Chief, you can't be serious. You're going to let the gardener touch a sniper rifle? Maddox's eyes didn't waver. Dead serious. Lieutenant, if Mr. Kane thinks he can call the wind better than my men, I'd like to see it. Elias hesitated. For 12 quiet years he had kept his head down, content to rake leaves and mend broken pipes. But watching these young men fight a battle against the wind he'd mastered half a lifetime ago, old instincts began to stir. And, for the first time in more than a decade, Elias Kane wondered what it would feel like to shoulder a rifle again. I wouldn't want to presume, Elias said, voice quiet but firm, still gripping the handle of his rake. No presumption. Chief Maddox cut him off. Consider it a learning opportunity for all of us. The old groundskeeper hesitated a moment, then lowered his rake into the dust. Each step toward the firing line was measured, steady, as if guided by instincts too old to forget. Every motion was economical, no twitch, no hesitation. He stopped beside Lieutenant Mercer's prone position, eyes narrowing at the shimmering desert target 1,000 yards away. His weathered hands hovered above the XM-2010 enhanced sniper rifle, a weapon newer than anything he had trained with, yet the fundamentals were unchanged. May I? Mercer smirked, rolling aside. Be my guest. Old man, just don't dislocate your shoulder trying to play soldier. The SEALs chuckled, but their amusement thinned when Kane lowered himself into the dirt. The transition was seamless. His frame seemed to fold into the rifle, shoulders and cheek settling as though built for it. Man and machine became one. He didn't rush the scope, instead. He lay still, as if waiting for the world to reveal itself. The desert wind tugged at his cap brim. He inhaled slowly, letting the weight of heat and silence sink into instinct. Barometric pressures dropping. He murmured, crosswind steady at 20 knots. See how the mirage curls. That's a thermal lift about halfway downrange. Mercer's smirk faltered. Nash shifted uneasily. None of their instructors had ever mentioned thermals. Kane slid behind the glass. His breathing slowed into rhythm. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Stillness. 3 heartbeats. Then, without tension, his finger closed on the trigger. The rifle roared. The muzzle blast punched dust into the air, rattling helmets and gear. Through spotting scopes, 6 SEAL snipers saw the impossible. The target plate cracked and toppled, center torn to shreds. The silence that followed was heavier than the desert heat. Beginner's luck, Mercer muttered, but the thinness of his voice betrayed doubt. Kane cycled the bolt with practiced ease. The second shot thundered within 30 seconds dead center, then a third, a fourth. By the 5th, the silhouette was no longer recognizable. The line stood in disbelief. Even Maddox, tempered by decades of deployments, lowered his binoculars slowly, expression unreadable. Mercer's jaw tightened. He's guessing. He has to be guessing. But Kane's calm face told another story. He rolled his shoulder once, relaxed, and spoke almost casually. The wind doesn't lie. You just have to listen. Maddox's voice cut through the silence. Quieter now, carrying a weight his men had never heard from him. Mr. Kane, what did you say you used to hunt? Elias's gaze lingered on the shattered target. The desert wind whipped between them. And, for the first time, something in his expression promised the answer would change everything. Elias Kane slowly lifted his head from the scope. His gray eyes no longer looked like those of a weary groundskeeper, they carried depths forged in fire. When he finally spoke, the words pressed down on the range with the weight of decades. Different kind of hunting. Chief Maddox studied him carefully. He had seen hundreds of men cycle through special operations, but Kane's stillness was unmistakable. The way he handled the rifle, the rhythm of his breathing, the effortless mention of MOA corrections and thermal updrafts, it wasn't theory. It was memory. "What's your last name again?" Maddox asked quietly. "Kane," the old man replied evenly. "Elias Kane." The name struck Maddox like a blow. He had heard it before, whispered in sniper schools, scribbled in classified manuals, spoken with awe in the hallways of Quantico. His throat tightened. Elias Kane. Force Recon, Southeast Asia. Operation Silent Ridge. Kane gave a single nod. Nash's voice cracked. "No way. You're the Phantom Eagle." The firing line went silent. Even Mercer's grin drained to ash. Every sniper who had ever studied long-range precision knew the legend Elias Kane. The Marine marksman who had turned the tide of battles with shots no one else would dare attempt. A ghost story. Made flesh. "You disappeared," Maddox said softly, almost to himself. "The files ended in 75. Everyone thought you were gone." Kane pushed himself upright, joints creaking from years of labor, and handed the XM2010 back to Mercer with the same care he might give a rose stem. "No reason you should have known," he said. "That was a different time, a different world." Mercer swallowed hard. "Sir, we didn't know. The wind's still 20 knots northeast." Kane replied calmly. "Hold 3 left, 1 up. The rules haven't changed." Chief Maddox stepped closer, his tone reshaped with respect. "Mr. Kane, I think my men could learn a great deal from you," but Kane shook his head gently. "They're fine operators. Chief, they just need to remember shooting isn't about the rifle. It isn't about the technology. It's about the environment. The wind doesn't salute rank. It doesn't bow to training. It only yields to patience and respect." He bent, lifted his rake, and slung it over his shoulder. The ordinary tool seemed heavier than any weapon. He turned toward his cart, steps steady, as though ready to vanish again into anonymity. The SEALs watched in silence, the shredded target flapping in the wind. Mercer opened his mouth, but no words came, and Maddox, staring after Kane's fading silhouette, felt a question burning deep in his chest how many other ghosts still walked unnoticed among them. "Besides," Elias Kane said, resting the rake against his shoulder, "I'm just the groundskeeper. You wouldn't want word getting out that your SEALs were taking lessons from the gardener." Chief Maddox watched him walk away, dust swirling around his boots, his mind racing. How many legends like this were still hiding in plain sight? How many quiet ghosts pushed brooms, trimmed hedges, and fixed broken pipes, while young warriors sweated through drills? Never realizing who watched them from the shadows, Kane Maddox called out. The old man paused, half-turned. "If you had the time, maybe you could show my snipers a few more techniques from those so-called hunting days for the first time." The corners of Elias's mouth tugged upward in the barest smile. His gaze swept the young operators' faces that now held not mockery, but genuine respect. Respect hard-earned by precision none of them had ever witnessed before. "I suppose," he said slowly, "I could spare an hour or two after I finish with the irrigation lines." In the weeks that followed, Elias Kane became something the Ironcliff Training Range had never officially listed: an unofficial instructor. He taught skills no manual carried. How to read the shimmer of a mirage and know where the bullet would bend. How to taste humidity before a storm. How to stop fighting the environment and instead let it guide the shot. The SEALs learned more than marksmanship. They learned humility. They learned that wisdom doesn't always wear a uniform with rank, or hang from a polished rifle rack. Sometimes it lived in calloused hands that had known silence longer than they'd known war. Lieutenant Mercer, the one whose arrogance had sparked it all, became Kane's most attentive student. Under the Phantom Eagle's quiet guidance, his shooting sharpened into something remarkable. More importantly, his character began to change. He stopped talking so much. He started listening. Only then did Maddox understand what Elias Kane had been: the Phantom Eagle, the Marine sniper whose name echoed in classified whispers of Southeast Asia. 311 confirmed missions, decorations never spoken aloud, a name erased from records, but etched forever into warrior lore. When the war ended, Kane had done what many men of his generation did. He walked away, chose peace not in medals or parades, but in the rhythm of simple work, tending gardens, repairing pipes, coaxing life from soil instead of taking it. For 12 years. He found his peace in silence, but on one Tuesday morning in Nevada, watching young seals struggle against a wind he had mastered half a century before, the ghost allowed himself to be seen again. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hidden in the most ordinary places. The janitor who knows engineering, the cook who once commanded battlefields, the quiet old man with weathered hands who once changed the course of wars. Have you ever met someone whose true story turned out far greater than you imagined? Tell us in the comments below. And if stories like Elias Kane's remind you that heroes walk among us every day, subscribe to Hidden Heroes for more tales of quiet legends. Because the next time you see someone going quietly about their work, you might be looking at history itself, disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the quietest ones. If stories like Elias Kane's remind you that heroes still walk among us, subscribe to Stories Unseen and stand with us in keeping their legacy alive.